Thank you for joining me today. My name is Anupama Jan. I am the Executive Director of Pittsburgh's Gender Equity Commission in the Mayor's Office of Equity. In a departure from our usual monthly meetings, we're going to take this time to take you through the history of the Gender Equity Commission. This marks 3 years since the commission started meeting, and we're still relatively new. There is a newer commission, the LGBTQIA+ commission, whose members were just recently announced, and that's something we're very proud of here in Pittsburgh. But the Gender Equity Commission may still be under the radar a little bit, but we've been doing some important work, and I want to highlight that work, and especially the volunteer commissioners, who are people who live or work in the city of Pittsburgh, and are therefore important elements of the city working for the people of Pittsburgh. So the commission's information will be on this slide, especially the website, and this slide set will be posted on our webpage, which is pittsburghpa.gov/GEC. So please do avail yourself of the resources, follow up anything you're interested in, and reach out to us via genderequity@pittsburghpa.gov. That email address is your gateway if you live or work in the city of Pittsburgh, to connect with us, to let us know what's on your mind, to make sure that we are prioritizing the things that you want to be prioritized. So I'm going to tell you about the Gender Equity Commission, but first I want to note that the Gender Equity Commission is one of a number of boards, authorities, and commissions that allow people to learn about, educate, and influence local government. So I have the website here for the boards, authorities, and commissions, and there's an exciting new partnership between the Mayor's Office and United We. It's called the Appointments Project. We want our boards, authorities, and commissions to look like the makeup of Pittsburgh. We need to diversify both gender, race, and other identities and perspectives. And United We has been using a research-driven approach that is very useful and impactful in making sure that we continue to do outreach and find ways to let people know about opportunities to serve on these boards, authorities, and commissions. And our local partners have been very important to this process. That includes the Women's Institute at Chatham University, the Executive Women's Council of Greater Pittsburgh, and Gwen's Girls. So definitely go to this website if you're interested in serving on a board authority, and it'll talk you through the process, and you can get help if you need it. But this is one way for you to be civically engaged and learn about your city. A different way to do this is the Civic Leadership Academy. And I'm mentioning this now because the applications are due soon. March 10th, you can apply for a program where you visit with city employees in different departments, and you learn how things work, how the sewer system works, how police and parking work. This is a chance to get an inside look and to really ask the questions that you have about your city. I highly recommend CLA. I'm a graduate myself for 2014, and it was a way that I really felt connected to the city and also to people in the city. A number of seats in CLA are reserved for immigrants, new Americans, and this is a really great chance to get outside of our silos of neighborhood, of just our communities, and just learn a lot. So I highly encourage people to take advantage of an opportunity. If you feel that your voice isn't heard as much as you'd like, these are chances and opportunities, along with connecting with the Gender Equity Commission. These are the wonderful commissioners with whom I work, and there are some new appointments that have just been approved, so stay tuned and check out our website. There is a list of our commissioners and their bios. And most of these are people who volunteer their time, and they're incredibly passionate. They have different kinds of expertise in gender equity, different life experiences, and they work together to really make a difference and to enact changes to make this city more livable for all of us. There are also some city employees who serve on the commission. Janet Manuel, who's the Director of Human Resources and Civil Service, Diamante Walker of the URA, Ricardo Williams of the Mayor's Office of Equity, Mike Strelick of City Council. And we also have Councilwoman Deb Gross representing City Council. So this group of people is diverse and opinionated, and they try to come to consensus and decide what are the priorities to really make our city a model city for gender equity. As I mentioned about our meetings and our website, here's a snapshot of what our webpage looks like. I encourage you to explore. The first thing I'd point you to in the tabs along the left of the screen to sign up for our e-news. This is the best way to stay updated and to respond to opportunities to participate in programming, in projects that are coming up, to make sure that you're in touch with the Gender Equity Commission. We only send an email once a month, a week before our monthly meeting, which are always public. And as long as we're working from home, they will be online, both streamed and recorded on the city's YouTube channel. But we'll remind you that the meetings are coming up. We'll tell you about opportunities. We'll share some news with you. So that's really easy, and that's an important thing to do if you visit our website. You can go back to 2018 and see the meeting agendas and minutes for all of our meetings if you're interested. And if there are changes to our meeting schedule, this is the place where you would find it on our website. So the other things that you might find interesting, we have our reports and policy recommendations, and they are written in a way that hopefully anyone can adopt pieces of our reports to inform their own work. And we share a lot of policy practice suggestions so that these are really working practical documents. The gender equity resources. Are you not sure if it's LGBTQIA+ or something else? Are you feeling like you're struggling a little bit with some vocabulary, gender and sexuality? Now is the moment when really there's a cultural evolution happening quickly. Different groups are using different terms, are understanding gender and sexuality in different ways. And so these resources include things like a glossary. They include some self-advocacy. I highly encourage people to think about how to educate yourselves, how to educate each other, share resources with us via our email address so that we can keep sharing them out with the public. And then finally, the workforce equity tab. And that's what I'll spend most of my time talking about. In 2021, given everything that's happening in the world, we really want to make sure that we're helping people achieve greater financial stability and equity in any way that the Gender Equity Commission can support initiatives and individuals. So I'll talk about that more in a second. This is an overview of what's happened with the Gender Equity Commission. It started with a local law, a CDAW ordinance that was passed in 2016. I was hired, I'm the one staff person as the executive director. I started in 2017. And as I mentioned, 2018, the commission started meeting. This timeline is on our webpage, and there are links to all of the documents there. So that's something that you can look into. And once again, we want to share what we're learning and discovering and recommending to the city. After the commission started meeting in 2018, they developed this mission and vision. The mission of the Gender Equity Commission is to achieve equity for women and girls in the city of Pittsburgh. Our vision is a future in which everyone in the city of Pittsburgh, regardless of gender identity or expression, is safe in all spaces, empowered to achieve their full potential, and no longer faces structural or institutional barriers to economic, social, and political equality. That vision is something we will continue to aspire to. And the way that we're working on it is to gather data, identify existing gender inequality, focusing on the experiences of women and girls in Pittsburgh, including trans women and gender non-conforming individuals, and then to find ways to dismantle those equity barriers and challenges. And so that vision is aspirational, and we really hope everyone will join us in doing the work to achieve that vision. You might be wondering, what is gender equity? And so this is something I prepared when I was thinking about how to really apply lessons from other parts of the world and the country to the work of gender equity. And so, as I mentioned, part of gender equity is redressing historic discrimination against women and girls in particular, that the category of female women were not able to vote, were not able to own property, and these are things that have changed in 100 years, but deep-seated traditions and institutions based on gender discrimination have not simply gone away. And so we need to continue to ensure that the conditions exist for women to achieve full equality with men. And this also means recognizing that individuals and men and women as groups may have differing needs. And one of the examples I often use is transportation. The public transit is often based on the needs of assumed needs of a stereotypical white male car-owning suburbanite. And in fact, men and women travel very differently. Women do something called trip chaining. And so these are based on a lot of different socio-political realities that we need to address when we're designing better public transit, for example. So we are using equity to get to a place where there is, in fact, a level playing field, which doesn't currently exist. Part of the work that we're doing in the Gender Equity Commission is taking best practices and applying them on the local level. So identifying what strategies really fit, because we're Pittsburgh, we're a unique city. We're not like other cities that have similar commissions. And at the same time, we can learn from those other locations. So one of the tools that we want to use is called a gender analysis, which means a specific set of activities to really get at the patterns of inequity that are most impacting people locally. So if you look at my little circle of bubbles, we're really starting with collecting disaggregated data. And that means that we need to know what the reality is for people based on gender, but also based on other identities. And I'll talk about that more. But this really shows the kind of path that the Gender Equity Commission is taking, collecting disaggregated data, connecting that to city departments and seeing how we can help them with their work, support them in their equity efforts, do rigorous environmental scans, partner with local groups, continue to add qualitative analysis, so people's stories, the lived experiences that might not be captured by the data, and then importantly, return to the policy, change the policies that we can change, the practices that we can change so that we achieve greater equity. In doing this work, Pittsburgh is joining a global network. And I mentioned that there was a law passed in 2016, a CDA ordinance. Then City Councilmember Natalia Rediak worked with a coalition of local organizations. And so their tagline is making the global local. So women's rights are a global issue, and people have been trying to find ways to really make the kind of change that in the United States, the civil rights movement, we hoped would achieve dramatic change in the forms of discrimination against women. When you look at the percentage of our elected government officials in the United States at the national level, we find that we really don't have the kind of gender parity we had hoped for decades ago. And in the 1970s, many countries who were part of the UN ratified CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and committed to systematic attempts to reach gender parity. The United States did not ratify this treaty, but there is a U.S. Cities for CEDAW community where they are really encouraging different municipalities to pass a local version and to really embed gender analysis and gender equity directly into the daily on-the-ground work of city government. So this is quite a victory that Pittsburgh was only the 6th city in the US to have an ordinance signed. And thanks go to a very dynamic, diverse group of local organizations. And you can go to the Pittsburgh for CEDAW page and look at the list of endorsements that they have. And the local coalition was led by the Pittsburgh for CEDAW local chapter, New Voices Pittsburgh, WILPF, and the Women and Girls Foundation. So we really have these organizations to thank for helping us become a pioneer around the country in doing gender equity work in this systematic, data-driven, evidence-based way. Sorry about that. My slides went a little funky. Okay, so customizing and using CEDAW principles, including gender analysis, using disaggregated data to drive policy changes. We are also using some very concrete frameworks, guiding principles. The first one is intersectionality, that if you are thinking perhaps of conventional quote unquote women's rights, we are focused on human rights, rights that affect all of us, because we are all implicated in systems of gender, whether we are male or female or gender nonconforming or gender non-binary. We are also implicated in institutions and systems where our social identities intersect and overlap with one another. And social determinants in the United States that your zip code can predict how much you'll earn and even how long you'll live. So the conditions are so different for people based on these social identities. And part of the goal of equity is getting to a place where your gender and your race, if you have a disability, that these things do not predict your life outcomes or your quality of life. So intersectionality is key to the work that we do. As is a recognition, as I've been mentioning throughout, that gender is not simply a binary. And this is a screenshot, excuse me, of the gender equity webpage, the Commission's webpage, where you can read more about what gender fluidity means and how this is showing up today. Very much part of American society, going back, conceived of differently in different historical moments by different cultural groups. Not something to resist or reject, but something to understand, a way to recognize human diversity. And that's absolutely part of the GEC's vision. Another thing is, you may have wondered about why we're the Gender Equity Commission and not the Gender Equality Commission. And equality and equity are often very much the same and related to one another, but it's important that we take an approach that doesn't assume a level playing field. And this is a graphic that many people may have seen before, but it takes the idea of a baseball game, and it points out that if people are different heights, and the goal here, the desired outcome, is that everyone can participate in this opportunity to watch this baseball game, giving them the same thing is not going to produce the outcome we want, because they don't start off the same. And that's true of human diversity in general, but it's specifically for groups that have been historically oppressed and disenfranchised, had not had equal access to resources, power, and privilege, that they're not all starting from a level playing field. And that is why equity is so important. It is not equality, everyone must be treated exactly the same way or we feel that it's unfair, but in fact, looking at the desired outcome and offering people systematic access to the opportunities so that we reach the desired outcome. So this is really central to the work that we do at the Gender Equity Commission. And then finally, something that has emerged and that I think is a really useful way to think about the work that we're doing is based on a partnership between the City of Pittsburgh and GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, really helping local and regional governments figure out how to plan for the future and vision in a way that includes everyone and takes into account equity as systematic and not just one-size-fits-all kind of equality model that hasn't worked in the United States. So they use an approach called targeted universalism, which means that our goals are universal. We want to better the lives of people of all genders in the city of Pittsburgh. The way to reach those universal goals is through targeted strategies. So if you focus on improving the outcomes for those who are most vulnerable to historical exclusion, oppression, lack of access to power and resources, we will be helping all people. And so we want to target those who are the most vulnerable, who are the worst off. And then we want to focus on changing policies, institutions, and structures. So not merely providing stopgap services, but to actually fundamentally change the ability that people have for self-empowerment and for greater, better outcomes. So these are some of our guiding principles. Combined with these principles we've developed collectively over the last 3 years, the Gender Equity Commission does its work and makes its recommendations to the Mayor's Office and City Council. That's our job as a city commission, that we are an advisory board, and we're trying to bring city government information, ideas, best practices, so they can continue to do their work well and even better into the future. One of the ways we do that is by collecting data. There is a strong data gap, which means that although many people assume that we can just simply access data that tells us about gender, we can't. It takes a great deal of energy and work to take raw data that is available and to pull out the stories and find the patterns that are visible there. This led to the 2019 report, Pittsburgh's Inequality Across Gender and Race. And the PIGR report exposed some very important things that have led to a lot of transformative conversations in the region about Pittsburgh's livability. Pittsburgh is often touted and awarded the title of most livable city. And this is true based on certain parameters and for certain demographics. It is, on the other hand, one of the least livable cities, especially for Black communities and especially for Black women. And this is something that is not news to a lot of people in Pittsburgh, but our report helped to sustain conversations about why is this a certain way, and more importantly, how are we gonna fix it? So 10 years from now, when this report is redone, we need to see a change in livability. This report that was conducted by University of Pittsburgh team led by Professor Sarah Goodhart, and the lead researcher on this report was Professor Junia Howell. They gave us a summary of areas for improvement, and they compared Pittsburgh to 89 comparable cities. The goal was to see what could be done on a municipal local level. If Pittsburgh, compared to these other cities, was doing well in some areas and not as well in other areas, that suggested that local interventions could make a difference. And so I've highlighted what we as the Gender Equity Commission can directly impact policies and procedures in local government. And I'll talk about how those fit into our workforce equity initiative going forward. But you'll notice number 2, number 3, number 4, number 9 have to do with economic access, financial stability, poverty, and access to living wage work. And so I will speak about those. You'll notice of these 10 areas for improved livability, they are targeting particularly Black communities. And some of these are Black women and children, Black men. There is one that affects all people in Pittsburgh, and that's for all students, low college admissions tests. Another trend in Pittsburgh that is important for everyone to know is that all students in Pittsburgh public schools are referred to the police at higher rates than almost every other comparable city. So these results are important, especially for us to figure out who we need to really work with who we need to listen to in order to make equity changes in the future, which means our Black communities. They need to take the lead in this work, to be centered and heard. Trust Black women when they tell you that their experiences in Pittsburgh are a certain way. And we have the statistical data to show that racism and sexism are the reasons for these inequalities. It's not personal choice, it's not cultural differences, it's structural, systematic exclusion and oppression that we can overcome, but we have to use our systematic approaches. But in addition to the report really highlighting how students in Pittsburgh are over-policed, it also points out that even white men who of the gender race groups analyzed, and this is using publicly available data from the Census and American Community Surveys, so this is not original data gathering, but even white men who are doing the best, when you look at high poverty rates, Pittsburgh ranks in the bottom third of US cities. So there's room for improvement. And once again, once we take a targeted approach and we look at those who are the most vulnerable to social inequities, we will ideally make improvements that will benefit all of us. So based on the four things that I highlighted, as I said, the financial and economic stability and access to work, good, affordable, safe work, which is connected to housing, which is connected to transportation, all of these intersectional issues. The Gender Equity Commission can make the most pointed recommendations for policy and procedure changes in terms of work. And this slide shows some of the results of a working group that has been diligently tracking how we can make a difference in Pittsburgh, researching examples in other cities in the country, looking at data. And I show these charts because the wage gap, and the wage gap is not a debate, it is not made up, it is one of the most rigorously studied and repeatedly proven that there is a wage gap in the United States that is attributable only to gender. And we would call it a gender and race wage gap because we see that, once again, based on the PIGR report, that Black women make even less compared to other groups than in other cities. But the wage gap is not closing. A lot of people assume we're getting there. We're getting better, gender equity. We're not. We need to do much more targeted intervention if we want to actually see a change. And given that women are often the heads of households, we need to be thinking about supporting women as supporting families and supporting communities, supporting neighborhoods, supporting the whole city and our economic well-being. The Workforce Development Working Group, which is now called the Workforce Equity Committee, I give great thanks to the commissioners who worked on that, Director Manuel and Commissioners Amanda Needtrower and Sarah Hansen. They produced white papers that are available on our website. I encourage you to look at them. Really thorough research. They also offered us some really important tools. So on this slide is the definition of workforce equity. And like the vision of the Gender Equity Commission, this, I think, helps us move away from a conversation about workforce development, treating people as cogs in a system of workforce that forgets to be people-centered. And we want to think about workforce equity. We want to think about fair treatment, access to employment, advancement for people. We want to think about overcoming implicit bias. And we really want to think about what it means to genuinely value difference rather than to pay lip service to it. And we want to see an outcome once again in 10 years. We want to see that at this level of this city, we've been making some progress on this gender and race wage gap. In order to collect the recommendations that the Gender Equity Commission is making based on the PIGR report, so based on gathering disaggregated data, analyzing it, looking at best practices around the country, in June of 2020, the Gender Equity Commission presented 11 recommendations for policy changes to the mayor's office and city council. We don't want to go back to pre-COVID normal, because that was not an equitable situation for the majority of Americans. The legislated minimum wage in this country does not allow anyone working full-time to afford adequate housing. So we need an equitable new normal, and we need to build it together. And so these recommendations are ones that I encourage everyone in Pittsburgh to get a copy of this report. Our outgoing chair for the Gender Equity Commission, Professor Jesse Ramey, really helped to put this all together with contributions from commissioners. But there's a lot of research, there's a lot of data. I would say, if nothing else, pick one of these recommendations and apply it in your workplace, in your company, in your business, in your community, in your nonprofit volunteering work, because all of these are shown to help with the Gender Equity Commission's central mission of improving the lives and conditions of women and girls in the city of Pittsburgh. Once again, I've blocked out the recommendations. There are 6 policy recommendations specific to workforce equity. These are the things that are going to make a dramatic difference, and that there are measurable changes we can track in other contexts, in other situations. And so please consider ways that you can adopt these, ask us questions. But this really is a living document, and the city is already working or has been working on some of these, and we can share with you updates about how the city has made progress on different ones of these recommendations. This slide and all of these slides will be on our website, which is at the bottom of this slide and on many of the slides under meetings, and you can find it. This was something that I wanted to find a way to really bring home how COVID-19 has dramatic gendered impacts. And some of the legislative and policy responses, many of you probably know that color blindness is not seen as a useful way to respond to racism and to achieve racial equity. Similarly, we cannot have gender blind policies. Our societies don't work that way. We have gender-based inequalities that exist. We have not made as much progress towards gender parity in the United States as we would like. Gender conventions mean that women continue to do the greatest share of caregiving for both younger and older generations. This means every policy you're adopting during and post-COVID has to have a gendered lens. And that may simply mean asking, what are the gendered implications of this? If you aren't routinely asking that question, you're probably not coming up with solutions that are as sustainable or impactful as they could be. But here, and I mentioned that you can access these slides so that you can return to these and really look at the ways that occupational segregation already puts women into vulnerable positions, over-indexing in informal economies, in domestic and care work, which is not protected by labor standards. And that women who have been starting small businesses in great numbers are finding themselves especially vulnerable to being in sectors that have been hardest hit, and they're closing businesses at greater rates. And they're facing remote work challenges because childcare and school closures are really being felt, especially by women who do most of the caregiving, as I mentioned. So I encourage you to think about this slide and to really ask how this might be affecting people in the context where you are. And I wanted to just bring it home with this slide because sometimes I feel that we can get lost in conversations about what's really true and what the patterns are. In late 2020, women lost 156,000 jobs and men gained 16,000. There is clearly a gender pattern here. This is not necessarily explicit racism or exclusion of women, but there are patterns in our society that are continuing to disproportionately impact women, especially women of color, especially Black women in the United States. And if we don't attend to that, any solutions we come up with are just going to lead to further problems and further inequality. So these statistics are in this chart are coming from McKinsey and Company's Women in the First Workforce report, which I encourage you to check out. It's online, available to anyone, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the picture that's being painted here is one that we need to collectively really directly address, because COVID is not in and of itself only changing the nature of work and workforce trends, but it's also impacting different communities differently. And so Black women are 3 times as likely as non-Black women to report the death of a loved one in recent months. So the overlapping nature of these traumas and these oppressive systems is really leaving just too much of our community in the United States and specifically in Pittsburgh in a position that doesn't serve them well and doesn't serve us well, that we need to really be proactive in supporting all of the members of our city. So this is a snapshot of our workforce equity page, which I mentioned earlier, and there's a 3-pronged approach we're taking. In the next couple months, we will be introducing free online trainings for all people in Pittsburgh. These trainings have been shown to specifically help women because salary negotiation is a place where women tend to get offered less money during employment. But we really want to make sure that these workshops and trainings, that everybody's interested signs up, because they provide professional development skills that anyone can use. If you have lost a job, if you're entering the job market, if you're transitioning, they are really focused on self-advocacy in the workplace so that individuals feel more empowered rather than less as we go through these uncertain times. The second prong is a workforce equity council and commitment, and we are looking for employers to join us, to share your great ideas and your successes, to learn from us about some policy recommendation we might make, but to work together into the future and sustain some really visionary ideas of how to have equity and uplift all of Pittsburgh. Finally, the third prong, we're going to be taking what we learned from the first 2 prongs and really trying to inform policy in local government and continue making recommendations to the mayor's office and city council. This last slide is one that I especially wanted to include, encouraging people to look at the slides later. These were best practices we included in the Building an Equitable New Normal policy recommendations. So it's also on our website as part of that document. But these are things that we have really landed upon as important things to keep in mind and important practices that we can all adopt. For example, recognizing that women are more likely than men to be living in poverty anyway, recognizing that 70% of households living in poverty in Pittsburgh are headed by a single female, that if you don't take that into account and you come up with a fantastic way to increase workforce participation without thinking of childcare, without thinking of transportation needs, without thinking about how much a minimum wage can really allow someone to live safely, accessing nutritious food, etc., you start to see that the solutions are inadequate. And so we're really excited to be in a city where visionary, bold ideas are happening, where there's a lot of civic engagement, a lot of debate and discourse. And we encourage you to keep doing that, and also keep in mind that gender equity best practices are something that we can all adopt at no cost. And sometimes to implement them, there are some costs, but we want you to prioritize those and work with us to make change. Finally, the last slide is links to our reports, how to communicate with us. And I'm going to come to an end here because we have some speakers, some public comments this month, and I'm looking forward to hearing from some locals about what they're up to relating to gender equity. I will leave with just an encouragement again to reach out to the Gender Equity Commission, to tell us what's on your mind, to learn about what we're doing. Gender Equity at pittsburghpa.gov. You can send an email anytime. Thank you. I am now going to ask Linda to introduce herself and to maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you're located and share the information that you have for us. Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you. Thank you for your time. So I appreciate your presentation, by the way. Very, very interesting to me as well. So right now I'm located in my kitchen because we are working remotely. But normally I would be sitting at the Allegheny campus at Community College of Allegheny County, where I'm looking forward to returning at some point. I'm one of the career specialists at CCAC, and I thank you for the time today just to briefly speak about and announce an event that we have upcoming. So we are promoting an upcoming event. We're hosting it as part of the Women's History Month this March. The Workforce and Job Readiness Department is presenting a virtual program. It will be on March the 17th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., highlighting women in engineering and STEM-related careers. Our guest will include present and former students who have chosen non-traditionally female careers, and very graciously, Dr. Ananjan has agreed to offer closing comments at this event, and we appreciate that as well. I can make a link available as well, and just realize that CCAC Workforce and Job Readiness, we work with everyone. So we do work with students, alumni, but we also work with community members. So please feel free to promote this event and our services in workforce and job readiness to everyone.
I have to unmute myself. Thank you so much for that. Maybe I can ask you a few questions.
Sure.
So what are you seeing where you are with the people that you're working with, the populations that you serve? I'd really love your insight.
Right, thank you. So we're seeing a lot of what you're talking about. We're seeing a lot of women with barriers that are as simple as, I don't have a bus pass to get to an interview. It may as well be on Mars. We're seeing a lot of people that have childcare that they have to tend to. A lot of people that are homeschooling their children, and really the last thing right now on their mind is taking remote classes and looking for work simultaneously. So we're seeing a worsening, as you mentioned, as what we did a year ago, if you can imagine that. So I did read the Workforce Equity Commission's report, and I can say that it is interesting that even fields like the trades are not equal in pay. And I don't know that I would have thought that, even just from being in workforce and job readiness. So yes, we're seeing a lot of difficulty. We're seeing hesitation, thinking that maybe things will get better. And so, yeah, we're working with a lot of students who are very confused at this time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm always trying to gather information because, of course, people are so varied, and we're similarly, of course, impacted by the things happening around us and COVID, but we're also differently impacted. And so, if you were to give advice, and given our audience, especially to younger women, in workforce, in terms of workforce, what might you say?
Well, I would probably say first just to be, don't be discouraged by the process. I was listening to one of the figures about improving just test scores, and we really do need to focus on that. When it's a fact that when people are doing, have to take developmental courses, there's a less chance that they're actually going to make it into the course of their choice, right? So we want people to be realistic, but we also want them to be encouraged by maybe some of the things that we do offer as far as helping with performance testing, just to enter into CCAC. But we really want people to know that, if I don't have an answer or I can't speak to something, I will find a resource to help you. So I want people to be encouraged by the process. I don't want them to be discouraged by it. I think that I would say that, to take it a step at a time. There are lots of different resources out there, but as you were saying, those resources are so different. you know, and they're different for different people, and people have so many different needs right now that sometimes getting a job just isn't the major need. It's getting food. So, you know, I would obviously tell them to work with us. As I said, we used to have just people walk into the Allegheny campus as a community member, and I would help them write their resume. You know, I would help them with a job application. So it's just something as simple as that that I can help with, or if they want to enter into classes, they can do that too.
Thank you so much, Linda. I really appreciate you joining us today. And we did have another public comment, and unfortunately the person was delayed with an emergency. So I'm sad about that. But we will be trying to continue figuring out tech needs. And I know that there are some members of the mayor's office and commissioners who are on the Zoom call with us. If any of them want to unmute and show your video and share any comments, please do. I wanted to mention there are resources out there. I know it is so challenging right now in many ways, and not being able to be in people's company, but I do encourage finding at least one resource somewhere, reaching out, because it only gets harder if you're also isolated. So I do encourage that. And the mayor's office has an economic opportunity page, so I suggest people who are struggling to look there. The URA has some really great support for small businesses, in particular minority and women-owned businesses, as the programs are called. And I also wanted to mention, I'm not sure how they're moving to online, but the Carnegie Libraries of Pittsburgh, and anyone can get a public, library card if you live in the city, has some really great job development support for free as well. And I'm not an expert on this, and this is not what the Gender Equity Commission does, but we want people to reach out if we can try and connect you to things. So I think, given that our other speakers were not able to make it, I am probably going to wrap up this meeting shortly, unless anyone would like to say something before I do that. Well, I want to thank you again, Linda. I want to thank the City Channel crew at the City of Pittsburgh, because they are wonderful. Jordan Fields is here with us, and she works as a policy coordinator in the Mayor's Office of Equity, and really supports the Gender Equity Commission. Our commissioners work really hard, and they made a decision that this month we were going to share with the community and update you all. And we're also seeing a transition in elected officers. So stay tuned. In March, we'll have lots of announcements, and we're here, and we're your commission in the city of Pittsburgh. So make sure you tell us what's on your mind. I feel like a radio call host now, but take care, everyone. Take good care. And thank you to everyone who's made the Gender Equity Commission possible. And thank you, David Feiner and friends who work for the city.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.